Hi there, everybody. This is Walter Stupworth, the CIO of Grit Capital Group, and today we have the enormous pleasure of inviting Nicolás Nico Massot, to have a chat about politics in Argentina, which is one of the hot topics now, given that we have an important election on Sunday and then another round on October 26th. Nico's an old friend of the Grit Capital team. We've counted on his insight over the years to let us know what's going on, as they say here in Argentina, in the kitchen. And we don't always agree. We don't always see things exactly the same way, but we think it's really important for people who are trying to understand Argentina's political scenario to get access and opportunity to listen to people like Nico, who have constructive criticism and towards the Malay government, and is somebody who's on the inside of the politics but is sitting outside of the administration today. Thanks for coming today, Nico.
Thank you very much, Walter.
I guess, given there are just so many different topics and we have a limited amount of time, I'd like to get your take, because many of the people that are sitting in New York, London, Los Angeles, and Miami are trying to really unravel, first of all, what this audio gate means for the Malay administration, in the sense is, what will this change in the way they operate? Will it change in the way they operate? And do you think it has a significant impact on effectively their public image and their overall ability to build consensus going forward?
I think it will have, and it will be expressed more clearly over time. Nowadays, the effects could appear as limited, mainly because we still have this, in my view, childish way of approaching reality, which is we only have two options. It's either this government exactly as it is, take it or leave it, or it's a complete way back to the worst version of Kirchnerism. So that obviously makes a lot of people to be able to, let's say, pay a higher price to stay with Milei that under normal conditions. Under normal conditions, this would be a huge scandal, and it would be impossible to explain how the president's sister or the Menem brothers are still on office and nothing changed and nobody said absolutely nothing, and it looks like only in Argentina this is possible. But over time, I think this is going to be a very deep scar in the image of the government, because mainly they promised two things. They promised economic stabilization and normalization, and they promised a strong battle on privileges and the political class. And they are showing the worst face of the most traditional political class, mainly because they are surrounded and they have in the inside of their own government mechanism plenty of people that come from traditional politics, which I don't have precisely a bad image on it. I think that the Argentinian problem is not a static problem. It has less to do with whether it's new politics or old politics or traditional politics, and it has much more to do with the content and the practices of politics. So these people can resemble new, but they are showing the worst of the old style. Many people are just not paying attention to that because of this sort of self-defense resource against the comeback of the Kirchner administration, but that will have a limit in time, and then I'm sure that Milei and La Libertad Avanza will start paying the cost of somehow betraying their electorate on this aspect.
Yeah, it's very difficult when you put yourself up on a pedestal as squeaky clean and that you're a crusader against corruption, and then something like this is that, that pedestal is going to have to be different, certainly going forward.
Yeah, and besides, this isn't an isolated case. We are somehow seeing a pattern. We have been seeing a pattern for the last 2 years. No? We saw in many cases, I don't want to bore, but we saw big tenders as the Hidrovia tender being directed, and then they had to interrupt it, and that was really a scandal that didn't take a big dimension because it was somehow more technical. Well, of course, they had the Libra issue, which is still under investigation and moving fast, especially in the U.S. Well, plenty of scandals, and all of them seem to point at the same people in government.
Yes, it's a difficult time for them, and perhaps they can navigate it because there is a belief among the Argentine populace that, well, everybody cheats, everybody steals. So as long as they're not the Kirchners and bid rigging everything. As we head towards the election, and obviously there's a lot of hand wringing over the result on Monday. We've gone out pretty strongly in saying, the Peronists always win in PBA, and the times that they don't, it's when Massot split the vote or so forth. But if the numbers come out, beyond the sort of acceptable range, which some people say is -5, how do you foresee the next 5 to 6 weeks of campaigning, of political spin doctoring and so forth to sort of arrive maybe, limping to the 26th of October election? And I know that, you've got a group of colleagues that are going with a party that's sort of in the meat of the sandwich, trying to drive down the middle, as you said, that nobody is occupied for a long period of time. So how do you see the next 6 weeks, assuming that there isn't a sort of miracle finish where somehow they beat the Peronists, for one of the first, or one of the few times in recent history?
I think that the weaknesses of the current model are much more structural than accidents due to to dates or to elections. Okay. Of course, a bad surprise on Sunday's election could speed up, but not more than that, not more than speeding up something that it's anyway happening. I guess that almost everyone now has in mind that this monetary regime is over, but it's over from the inside. I mean, from its own contradictions, and then the only question here is which is going to be the acceptable level of risk the big agents of economy are prepared to take from now to the 26th October regarding the dollarization of portfolios and the anticipation of a new correction in the FX. That could be, as I said, speed up by a number of external factors and happening more explicitly before the national election of October. But at this point, everyone is expecting that to happen immediately after the election. So I wouldn't
after
see
the October
election, of
right.
course. I don't see the elections are going to be that relevant. I mean, so the state elections of Sunday, because be the result a victory or a failure, I wouldn't expect the behavior of capital to change. It's only a matter of the speed it's going to take before October or after October.
Yeah, I think we see eye to eye with you. It's one of these, funny things, if you've been watching Argentina for a long time, is this superstition that you can't have a depreciation or a devaluation of the currency right before the election. But it seems as though the path that this president and the economic team have taken is that, well, we're happy to throw the economy in the recession, take interest rates to 70%, which isn't a great substitute. And you, I think, on some of your Twitter appearances say, why are you throwing good money after bad in ROFEX and so forth when that money could be better spent elsewhere? And why not let the currency and have confidence in your own program that the currency will settle at something that isn't, as they say here, Jupiter?
Absolutely, and especially because as we are still with some signals of recession, the pass-through from the FX depreciation to prices is not really significant nowadays.
Right.
So the best time to allow that depreciation to happen is now, and that would definitely be a better signal for the activity, generally speaking, industrial employment, which is in crisis, and if government doesn't change in the short term this monetary scheme, we are going to see a deepening of job destruction in Argentina, and that it's always worse than inflation. It has always proven to be worse.
It's a huge political liability going into the 26, 27 presidential
way
election.
larger than
Right.
inflation.
I agree.
Way larger than inflation. And then it would also stabilize a lot the balance of payments, because now we are definitely seeing a boost in imports due to this artificial level of equilibrium in the FX. And we are not taking out of exports all that we expected to take out of there. So I definitely see that a certain level of correction in the FX would be healthier for the economy. And again, up to now, we are not seeing relevant pass-throughs from depreciation to prices. So I wouldn't take that serious, the threat that the government is considering after a depreciation. In fact, last month we saw a 14% depreciation, and probably due to the recession, levels of prices are not seeing a significant rise.
There was another thing that we were discussing before we sat down and the guy started filming today, which is, I think, at least from our perspective and a lot of people in the market's perspective, that, you know, no matter what happens after the election, whether they come out, you know, super strong or just a little bit better than they came in terms of a governability standpoint, is that there's been a lot of unforced or forced errors in the political management. The issue with the Valdez brothers and Corrientes and some of these other issues where they took a very high-handed approach about some of their past allies, that, you know, they were doing very well with the governor of Catamarca, very good with the governor of Tucumán. These guys helped them get some of the laws through that they needed to get through in the last 2 years, and they sort of said, you know, now I don't need you anymore. My perspective would be is that in a normal Latin American government, you get a cabinet shuffle after the midterm elections. You bring in some new blood, at least on the political management, or some of the people that maybe made the mistakes that have put you in this predicament get demoted or put into a back room. Now, we all know that that's very difficult for the president to do, for the person that's closest to him. What kind of probabilities do you assign that we'll see a shakeup, that we'll see some changing, some new protagonists? You know, would it help if Cristiano Ritondo becomes the head of the LLA bloc? If Patricio Bullrich becomes the head of the Senate bloc? Is that, I don't think you're that optimistic, but, you know, how do you weigh that in terms of a risk reward for the Milei administration? Because at least in our view is they need to do something. What do you think that they should do, and what do you think is the most likely scenario in sort of November, December, January?
Those are two very different questions. What do I think they should do, and how likely
Right, exactly.
I believe that happening. You gave good examples, concrete examples on those political failures or bad approaches. Generally speaking, or trying to conceptualize the whole thing, I would say the big change they need to do is they should stop seeing Congress in particular and politics in general as a zero-sum battlefield to which they just go to strengthen their own identity with their own, let's say, half or 40% of the electorate, and they should start seeing in Congress what Congress really is for a Republican system, which is the vehicle through which you construct the majorities needed to give stability to your policies. And that sounds like a like a nice dream, has been truth in many countries and in Argentina as well in the recent experience. So I don't know if they are mentally and spiritually prepared to do that change, because we would be seeing a totally different government. And I'm not sure if that would make them even lose some support, because they have been so emphatic in this approach that they have convinced a lot of people on this aspect. So if they suddenly change it, which I think would be positive, it might turn negative for their own support. So I think they are in a deep contradiction. I don't know how they are going to really sort it out. So you can already imagine that on the second question, how likely I believe this to happen, it's, well, quite unlikely, unless, and this is something no one really wishes, unless this turns really shaky and they feel obliged, they feel forced, they really feel there's no other way out than going the traditional way, which at the end has proven to be successful in many parts of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to be a little bit more optimistic on this for the simple recognition, and this will be coming across your desk in the first quarter of next year, is that we've got at least 3 major reform packages that, you know, as we say in the United States, touching Social Security is like the third rail. Don't touch it or you'll get electrocuted. Is that although that is on the to-do list of things that they ostensibly promised to the IMF, and we've seen, 14 tons of rocks being thrown anytime, when your government, went through the same process. They want to do a tax reform, which is absolutely necessary if you're going to get this productivity revolution. I think everybody agrees. And then also you need labor reform. So all of these are very touchy and difficult reforms to get through. And let's say they get to 85 or 90 deputies, that's not going to take them to home. So one would think if they were not so hard to deal with, that they would come to the epiphany that they're going to have to go back, do a courtship of the governors, come back to the table and take a completely different approach. Because if Milei really wants to win the Nobel Prize for economics, and I think that's his true dream, is that you don't get there is if you don't get at least 1, 2, or 3 of those reform packages.
I would suggest him to dream somehow closer to that. Let me give an optimistic view. We are absolutely in time to stabilize, to normalize not only the macroeconomic, but the microeconomic and the politics in Argentina. Fundamentals of the economy are still strong in many aspects. And among the different political parties in Congress or in the provinces, it's not true that everything is going back to Kirchnerism. There are very relevant stakeholders that share many of the main objectives that this administration have traced. So we are still in time. Regarding the reforms, they're absolutely necessary, but you can have very different tax reforms. And the secret is in the details, in content. So let's suppose that they come with a very traditional, old-fashioned, liberal tax reform, just reducing the corporate income tax and the dividend tax. That would probably not see the light, because that would be a bad decision in this context. If they come with a much more equilibrated, consumption-linked tax reform, for example, eliminating credit and debit tax, which affects 90% of the population and all the corporations, and, for example, reducing a couple of points the value-added tax that at the end would also benefit profitability of many companies, that would probably, by its own weight, have much more support. So it's impossible to have a serious debate on a labor reform, a tax reform, or a social security system reform without naming the content of that reforms. And so far, the content of the reforms haven't been that happy. I mean, the only tax that this government decided to reduce, almost eliminate, was the wealth tax, which, of course, I agree, it should have, it needed a reduction. But in politics, you need to choose the right timing. So the details of the reforms so far weren't very happy, in my opinion. So coming forward, it's not that if he has only 90 members of the House, all the rest would be against any reform. Not at all. But it depends on the content of the reforms.
And that requires consensus building.
Well, yeah, unless you are a magician and you read the minds of the rest of the parties that need to compromise with the reform that you are sending. But I mean, we are discussing the obvious.
One of the other big topics, and I know we have a limited amount of time, is that, and we've discussed with you in the past, is that we've had a bipolar world in Argentina, which is Kirchnerism, which is maximum populism, print and spend, deficit monetization, and now we have, which is a different iteration of the Macri administration, one which is fiscal responsibility, more sort of liberal policies, is that there seems to be a scramble or a scrum going on among the Peronists now that Cristina has been under house arrest. And at least one of the politicians that we are good friends with believes that if the Peronists do win on Sunday, it's their last election that they're going to win. Who fills that space? Who comes in? And obviously there are a lot of people who have been under the thumb of the Kirchnerists and so forth. Who do you think comes in and becomes another political grouping that's rational, that maybe accepts the fact that fiscal surpluses are necessary? Do you think that there is potential for us to go from this bipolarity to something which a lot of Latin American, people investing in Latin America would love to see, is two rational political groups that are dominant and not a fragmented, political system?
I think it is possible. I mean, I wouldn't venture myself to naming who could come.
Right.
But what is going to come, or what we need to see coming, is some sort of harmonization on the two concepts you just described. So far, we've been dancing between one sector that apparently needed to bankrupt the state to accomplish with a socio-economic equilibrium and rights gains, that is very deep in the Argentinian culture, and that has traditionally been expressed by the Peronist Party. But apparently they have lost the ability of harmonizing that socio-economic delivery to the masses with a macroeconomic, fiscal and monetary responsibility and sustainability. And the responses to that have usually been very extreme and very aggressive with consumption and activity and employment in Argentina. So apparently the other extreme only can manage to deliver some fiscal order with social unrest. And really, there is a lot of room for that harmonization to happen. Whom? I don't have a clue. But I definitely see that's the way. And of course, my hope is that happening and being represented by someone with normal percentages of common sense. Not more than that.
I just want to, pose one last question, Nico, is that given your, clear misgivings about some of the implementation and the behavior of this government, you as a young political leader in this country, are you still optimistic about Argentina's future, 3, 5, 10 years down the road? Do you think that enough cultural change has come that we aren't going to go back to the bad old days?
I am. I definitely am. I've already walked you through the great economic fundamentals we still have. We need to solve this kind of 3 to 4 years bridge in the financing of where we are now to where we can definitely be in 2027, 2028, when the full potential of the energy sector, mining sector, and the reduction of taxes for the agribusiness sector and knowledge economy could really boost. So I definitely see that coming. And I am optimistic because I don't agree with that saying that goes in the way that the only way of being successful is if this government is successful, whatever it takes. I think we need to be very conscious on the prices that sometimes they ask us to pay as a society to endorse what they propose, and that they have been much more successful in their cultural impact, in Milei's cultural impact, in managing really a cultural shift in the political class, in the private sector, in the society in general, regarding the need of a better macroeconomic approach, fiscally and monetary speaking. They have been much more effective in their cultural impact than in the implementation of that cultural change, which, as I told you before, they are definitely underperforming and generating much more uncertainties than certainties. But I definitely believe, with independence of the current government, Argentina has a very promising medium term.
Well, that's great. Nico, thank you for your time. It's always incredibly interesting and insightful to listen to your views, and I think it's important for people to get some views that aren't always from the multiple cheerleaders of this government. And, at the end of the day, I think, we do agree that some sort of pivot or reboot needs to take place after this election cycle. 2 years to 2027 is a long time, and there are things that need to be perfected and fixed. Hopefully we'll see Nico again.
Sure.
Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you, Walter.